Hi everyone. So today what we are going to be looking at is the unit for second years called Creative Resistance. This unit is really trying to focus away from usual types of taking action towards more creative ways, different ways that might suit different types of students. It's also going to help your students look at the world in different ways, look at the media in different ways. And there's a lot of different creative and art activities thrown in. So it's quite a fun unit. So, what is creative resistance? So, this is week one, we're just in now. It's just using creativity to tell a story that challenges a social, environmental, or economic justice issue using whatever tools, creative tools that people have. Another way of looking at it is it's using the arts to do an action about something we care about, imagine a different way of life, tell people a story about something you care about, or get people interested in something that we care about. So, in the first week, what you're just going to be doing with your students is showing them some examples from across the world of different young people who have done different types of creative actions and creative resistance. And then you're going to do a activity in the second part of the class with natural materials. So what you want to do before this class is either plan to bring your students outside, ask them to bring in natural materials, or bring in some natural materials yourself. That might be twigs, leaves, whatever. Um, and it's an activity to both get them being creative, but it's also an activity to get them to think about how they work in groups, because it's the other part of this. We're always talking about groups. We're always trying to learn from different groups from across the world about, what's important about working together and how can we work together well. Because, and we're always saying this, but the society that we're in at the moment, the way we're living is very individual. So a lot of the solutions and alternative ways of living are about working better together. So starting that with your students now is and having those conversations so as they have an understanding is really important. So there's a piece here about writing down the creative skills that students have. You could have a bit of fun with this. You could, let them all write them down, draw it, create a collage, create a board of all the different skills that your students have. So yeah, allow that to be quite generative. Um, this is a small activity just to start off with. So you're getting what your students have already thought about, all their skills they have, and you're just doing a quick activity. So there's a brand coming to the school to promote their new sustainable schools fashion line, but you think it's greenwashing. So you want very quickly just give this, 10 minutes. How could they use their all the skills that they've already talked about as a form of creative resistance and let them think as crazy as possible. If they're all into football, you could say, maybe they hold a football match at the front of the school so that with a green ball to say you're greenwashing, you're not coming into our school. Let them think big and creative. So then we're going to look at some of the case studies. So this first case study is called Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs are a really nice group. There's on the second slide there is there's a video of the founder where you can learn more about why Food Not Bombs was founded. But really, it's an organization that says there are lots of issues in the world, lots of money is being spent on arms, bombs, but also things that money shouldn't be spent on when there are hungry people in the world. So it looks at things like, what do we, what can we do about that? So they made food to feed homeless people. They go to protests and they give people food. Lots of things like that. The previous video here is one of some young people in Cardiff working on this. Unfortunately, the food does not look particularly nice, so you might have to have that conversation with your students. But it's a really cool organization, and they have chapters all across the world, so that's something that your students could explore. And then the next one is we're playing videos all over the show. And this is a little bit about Dublin Food Not Bombs. A bit more about Food Not Bombs. And as you can see, there's chapters all over the world, so that's something that they could explore together. And they also use waste food, so that's something that you could talk to your students about and just, ask them is this something that interests them? Would they like to do something like this? Critically engage with them about these different case studies. Second one is protest theatre. So this is a play called The Fall that was made in South Africa in the University of Cape Town when there was conversations happening around a guy called Cecil Rhodes, and Cecil Rhodes was a slave owner, a colonizer who there's a big statue of him in Cape Town. There's also a big statue of him in Oxford. And a few years ago, they really wanted to campaign to take it down because they said it was a symbol of colonization, a symbol of white supremacy in the university. And then some students made a play about the process. They did get the statue taken down, and they made a play about the process. And so this is a trailer of the play. That's another way of communicating issues. So yeah, this is Cecil Rhodes. And it got taken down in the end. Okay, and then the third one is art activism. So this is Subvertisers International. Subvertisers is an organization that are a combination of subvert, so changing the meaning of something, and advertising. And their kind of motto is we don't consent to being advertised to, especially about polluting industries or industries that harm us. So they go around and they change the ads. Sometimes it's legal depending on when you are, sometimes it's not legal. You might want to have that conversation with your students. You might have a conversation about is advertising a good thing, is it not? But they try to change the story that the brands are telling us. So here there's some flight ones that they did in the last few years. Some about airport expansion. Oh yeah, this is all about flights. The next, so again, just talk to your students, like, is this something they would do? If they're really arty, they could do some really interesting advertising even in their school, make different kind of ads about different issues and post them up around their school. This is BP or not BP, who were angry that British Petroleum, who is a fossil fuel company, were sponsoring cultural institutions in London. So they're sponsoring the Royal Shakespeare Company, they're sponsoring the British Museum, and they did loads of different actions to try and raise awareness of that. It started off with a group of actors who went on the stage just before a play of Hamlet in Shakespeare's Globe and did the classic the Hamlet speech, to be or not to be, but they replaced it with BP or not BP. And it took ages for people to realize what was going on. And they did years and years and years of all this campaigning. Every time there was a exhibition on in the British Museum, they would find an angle to talk about the issue of getting these museums to stop taking sponsorship from BP, so that BP weren't greenwashing. So when these companies are allowed to sponsor these kind of museums and cultural institutions, it gives them this lovely veneer of really caring when they're making all this money from fossil fuels and polluting industries. So they won both of those campaigns, but this video is from when there was a Troy exhibition on in the British Museum, and they brought in a Trojan horse representing that BP sponsoring this is a Trojan promise. It's a Trojan horse. They say that they care, but they're actually they don't. They also did a really interesting one about rising sea levels and the lost city of Atlantis, which was really good as well. The next one is the COP26 coalition. This one's just creative protest. So this is a video from COP26 when lots and lots of different organizations came together to create different types of protest, which is quite fun. Yeah, so then what you do with all those, you have a conversation with your students around those, and then what you do with them is you give them a worksheet or show this slide, and then you just ask them to answer these questions. So it's just getting them to engage with it. So, what is the problem that they're addressing? What new story did the group tell? What creative tactics do they use? What interests, passions, or skills they need to pull this off? And do they think it could be an effective form of creative resistance? So it's just in groups or individuals, ask them to have this conversation, and then you can chat to them afterwards. The second part of this week, and again, these activities are all suggested. You don't have to do them all, especially if you feel like you're not going to have time to do them is a creative action. No, I'm actually wrong. It is not a creative action. The creative action is the end of week 2. So we're on week 2 here, which is you've just gone through some examples and started your groups thinking about what is creative resistance. Am I creative? What creativity can I bring to the table? And then thinking we're going deeper into thinking about what do groups need to do in order to be able to do actions like this? They need to be able to work together well in order to be able to do effective creative actions like the ones that we just saw. So you're going to show them this iceberg. Here's examples of the different activities that or actions that we saw earlier. And what we're really talking about with this iceberg is, when the public sees something that happens, they just see the top of the iceberg. They see the creative resistance, they see the action, they see the play, whatever. But what they don't see underneath is that there's lots and lots of things that have gone on. So people have built relationships and trust together. They've got maybe shared values and principles. They've got ways of making decisions together. They've got ways of dealing with conflict. They've got past learning of other issues, of other times they've worked in groups that they've brought to the group that mean that maybe this group works really well together. And they've got an understanding of the root causes of the issue. So they're really trying to work to change the root cause, or change the issue by the root causes. So the first thing that you're going to do with your students is get them to think of a group, a club, a team they're part of. And then they're just going to answer questions about that. So questions like, does friendships within the group have an impact? Does past learning, does people's experiences of before being in other groups have an impact on the group that they're in? Does the group have a shared goal or an aim? So if it's a sports team, it might be like we just, we want to win the cup, or we want to work well together. We want to play well together. In order to be able to do that, we need to, listen to our coach. We also need to communicate well together. I was in a club in the past, and we didn't communicate well, so now I'm in this club and I'm trying to listen more to my teammates, things like that. Again, questions around conflict. And then what you're going to say is like, is there any conditions for a healthy group culture that you feel are missing from the diagram? So you might want to go back to this diagram and make your own iceberg, given what your students are coming up with. So is there anything that you would add to this iceberg? So then the second part of it, once you've done that, is then putting this group stuff into action. So you might want to have already thought about bringing in the creative materials, bringing them for a walk. I already said this when I thought this was in week 1. So it's actually this week that you want to prepare for this. They're not allowed to use anything except the natural materials. So you don't need glue, nothing like that. They just need to make it using what they have. So it's a bit of a challenge. It needs to tell a story about something they care about in relation to the environment. Each group needs to have a title and be able to describe the meaning. And they need to think about their group skills while they're doing this. So one person can't just take over. They need to be doing shared decision making and working well together. It's up to you how long you give them for this. Obviously, a shorter amount of time is more of a challenge. A longer amount of time gives them really a chance to reflect on their group skills. At the end of it, you give each individual student these questions. There's a worksheet, or you can just give them questions on the slide. And then you ask them to reflect on how they worked. You can just do that, and that's fine. You can have a conversation about it. You can ask people to share. It's up to you as a teacher how you feel about it. And obviously, you can change up these questions if you want. So that's the end of week 2. And so we're moving on to week 3, which is the 3 stories of our time. And 3 stories of our time comes from the work that we Reconnects by Joanna Macy. And it's an idea it's a way of analysing the media and information that we get, and also stories that we tell about the situation that we're in. So I'll go through them a bit more in detail. So the first thing you're going to do is this about media. So you're going to there's 3 debate questions. We're suggesting you do it in a spectrum line, but it's up to you how you do this. So you'd ask students to say, if they agree with this statement, they stand at one side of the room. If they disagree, they stand at the other. And they can stand somewhere along a spectrum in the middle. So if they not sure, they don't disagree or agree, they'd stand right in the middle. They don't totally agree, but they somewhat agree. They'd stand more to the left, but not entirely all the way. And then what you have to do is you have to draw out answers. So you ask students, why are you standing over there? Why are you standing over there? What does that mean to you? And people encourage students to move along the line if they hear an opinion that's changed their mind. So it's just getting them to start thinking about these things and draw out different opinions in the room. So we've got 3 questions about the influence of the media and social media. And then we have this introduction to the 3 stories of our time. So this is a video about the 3 stories of our time. It will probably be really helpful for you to watch this video. You may decide or may not decide to show it to your students, depending on how confident you feel talking about the issues, how useful you think the video, and how accessible you think the video is to students. But essentially, the 3 stories of our time is a way of looking at the world and the stories that we get. So the first story is business as usual. It has a story that, economic growth and prosperity and just continuing the way we are and the way the world is run right now is good. Maybe we need a few tweaks, but essentially it's totally fine. And we don't need to change anything. The Great Unraveling is a way of looking at the world. It says everything's collapsing, everything's terrible, there's loads of disasters, it's really awful. And finally, we have the Great Turning, which is a way of looking at the world that says, it basically says business as usual is the thing that's creating all these terrible things. But we can't just talk about the Great Unraveling and give up. It can't just be this is the end of the world and we have to give up. We have the opportunity, and now is a moment to change the world for the better. So, creating alternative systems, creating alternative ways of working in the world, of living, is all involved in the Great Turning. And what's important is that these stories are all happening at the same time. It's not that we're waiting for the Great Turning to happen, or that the Great Unraveling is happening, but business as usual is finished. Business as usual is happening. Terrible things are happening in the world. The Great Unraveling is going on. People are creating alternatives, but we get to choose which one we want to think about the most and which one we want to be part of. And it also helps us critically analyze what stories we're getting from the media. Are we getting stories that there's no hope, that everything is terrible, and we have to think about what does that say to us? What options does that give us for action to create change? So I said that. And so this goes through these stories a bit more. Again, business as usual is we don't need to change how we live. Economic growth is essential for a good life. It's the most important thing. And getting ahead by yourself is the most important thing. And that nature is something to be used for human purposes. And also important that the problem of other people and species and nations are not a concern, everyone for themselves. These are obviously, there's lots of debates that we can have about these, but this is a condensed version to try and categorize these different ways of looking at the world. So the Great Unraveling says, all these terrible things are happening. It says it's because business as usual. All these terrible things are happening. It's backed by scientific research. So things like, crime and diseases and war and climate change and all these things. And it's just it's a whole barrage of the really bad things that are happening. But it doesn't really give us a way out. It just is a explanation of the problems. Whereas the Great Turning is about new and creative ways of dealing with issues that support the healing of our world. This is a bit of a more complicated quote, but we've put it in just because it's from Joanna Macy, who wrote it, and I think it's useful. So future generations, if there is a livable world for them, will look back at this epochal transition, but we can just see this time, this moment, that we are making right now. We're making a life-sustaining society, and they may look back and call this the Great Turning. So it's the idea that they, like we've looked back and called things the Renaissance, that they'll look back and go, wow, there was a time when things were going really badly, but actually, at that point, people really started to make change. And they may call that the Great Turning. There's 3 parts of the Great Turning. This can be a bit complicated because you've got 3 stories of our time, but then you've got 3 parts of the Great Turning. But the idea is that, things don't just change out of nowhere. So you've got the 3 parts, which are holding actions. So that's like campaigning, boycotts, rallies, legal proceedings, direct actions, a lot of the stuff that we see as traditional activism. Then there's changing how we live. So that's building alternatives. So that might be, creating more sustainable food systems, cooperatives, swap shops, a whole host of different ways, eco-friendly housing, community-owned energy, a whole host of different ways of actually things that people can look to and go, wow, there is another way. And then the final thing is about changing what we care about. So, for instance, in the business as usual, there are values of nature as something that can be just used for human consumption. Nature is money. Cutting down a tree, if it gives you money, that's then you should cut down the tree. Whereas changing values towards, well, nature is something that is inherently valuable in itself for our lives, and we should care for it. Things like that. So changing the values so that we can build a different system, so as people understand why the actions are important, and that's how change happens. This is just another way of looking at it. They're all connected. They're all happening at the same time. It's another, if you want to go deeper, it's more examples there. And then what you're going to do after doing that with your students is we have a student handout which has a load of headlines on it. And basically all your students are going to do is look at the headlines and say which of these headlines is related to which story. Some of the headlines are a bit more technical and more complex than other ones, and it's up to you whether you want to include them. We've left them in because, and in the teacher activity outline, we give some explanation for them. So, for instance, there's one about a company wanting to build a carbon capture and storage center, and there's another one about a data center. And you might feel like that's not something that my students are going to understand, but you might also feel, do you know what, those are important issues that I want to discuss with my students. And so you might leave them in and use them as a place to start discussing, is carbon capture and storage a good thing? Is our data centers a good thing? Questions like that. We've got some information for you and some support for you in the teacher activity outline to have those discussions. And yeah, so you're getting your students to look at the headlines, match them up with the different stories, say, what is the headline saying about the world? What message is the headline trying to send? Is it, business as usual, great unraveling, or great turning? And that sometimes there might be more than one and it might be confusing. And so it's really important that it's not just about getting it right. It's about having like conversations. So you might decide to put them into small groups and give each different headlines. You might decide to give everyone the same headlines so that you can have a really good debate about each one. Okay, so that is the end of that week. So now we're in week 4. Actually, sorry, I'm at the wrong start. There we go. So now we're in week 4, and week 4 is focused on storytelling. And I guess we're still thinking about the media, we're still thinking about advertising, and we're thinking about the stories that we get and are told about products and about the world. So you're going to start off with greenwashing. And this is quite a fun activity. So greenwashing is when a company uses adverts and PR campaigns to make a product or a brand or the whole company appear greener than it really is. So we've got some examples here. There's a link in the slides which should support you to think more about what greenwashing is. Different examples of where certain terms such as recyclable or eco-friendly, what they can actually mean or not mean. So you just discuss what greenwashing is with your students. You might get them to think about it first before you give them the answer. And what they're going to do is you can make this as long or as short or as fun or as simple as you want. So you're going to give them an everyday item from the classroom. And they might all get the same item, they might get a different item, and you're asking them to greenwash the product and to, in essence, pitch it to Shark Tank. Now, you might decide that you might pick 5 kids in the class to be the sharks. You might be the shark, you might, get different groups, or you might say, look, we're not actually going to do real pitches, you're just going to write them down. It's just an exercise. It's totally up to you how kind of into it you get with this activity. So you can show them an example like this one about this green pen. So you might give them a pen, and they might sell the pen and say, oh, this pen is so great. Look, it's green. That's amazing. That means it's super eco-friendly, and it's really good at drawing trees. And look, it's not even a pencil, so you don't need to cut down trees for wood. Or as eco-friendly or as greenwashing as they are able to do on a particular product. So that's the first activity. And then the second activity is bringing us deeper into storytelling, and really thinking about what are the stories that we're told. So greenwashing is one story that we're told, and you're bringing it into students' everyday lives, and what are the stories that are told about the spaces that they live in. We're thinking a bit about the fact that with climate change, places might be destroyed in floods or in fires. We're also thinking that some developments, so building roads, building shopping centres, building housing developments, building wind turbines, solar farms, things can end up getting destroyed, and they often do. And there can be good reasons and bad reasons for that. But there's something important about telling stories about spaces that people care about, and linking people and making people really care about the spaces where they live. So telling stories about them. And that's historically a really, really important tool. So this is a really nice, you may have come across before, from Dukas. It is a huge collection of folklore. There's a section from school children, but also sections from across the whole of Irish society. From the 1930s. So this one is particularly, they asked school children. So you can go onto dukas.ie, it's linked here, and you can see your area, your school, and what young people at that time were saying about their local area. So it's a really nice tool to look at with your students and go, wow, those people really appreciated that, and how important it was that they wrote those stories down, and have a conversation about the importance of knowing from the past and documenting simple everyday things. And the process of documenting names. This is another one about a Native American youth group celebrating water because they have struggles with protecting the water. So that's a play they tell the story for. And mapping is also really important. So actually drawing maps of places as they are, to connect to them, but also to keep them safe, and keep them eternalized before things change, or in case things change. So this is school children in Uruguay who were focused on water sources and agriculture. And when they were thinking about how are different things impacting the water sources, the availability of water, the connections between people's homes, people fighting fossil fuel plants, gas plants, etc., tend to do these a lot to show, like, if this goes here, then look how it's going to impact the water, and I'm a young person and this is what I care about. So it's nice. This is another one done in an urban setting in Bristol, and just again celebrating the different spaces, making it really creative and lovely. And I guess this is a nice quote: recording that something exists is the first step to showing that it's valued. This is one way to protect it from being destroyed in some future development. And you can have a conversation about, what does development mean? Is it good to build things? Is it always important to build things? What do we lose in development? Does it depend what it is? Have an interesting discussion about that. So now your students are going to do celebrating something that they love, even if other people might not think it's important. So it's important for this next activity that they are choosing something. It doesn't have to be huge, it just has to be something small. So it might be like their favorite park bench, some graffiti that they love, a tree they used to climb. Ideally, it's something that's often overlooked, that they have a personal connection to. And then they have two options. So you can change this slide depending on which one you choose, or you could give them both options. The first one is to write a song, a poem, a story in celebration of that feature that they've chosen. Or they could draw a map of their area, highlighting places that they love. So it doesn't have to just be, here's a road and here's a space. It could be more like the one from Bristol, where they're really highlighting cool places that they really love. So that is week 4. And then finally, week 5 is just really a continuation of week 4, where you can get your students to present what they were making and drawing in the previous week, so their maps or their stories or their poems, and or you could make a zine with them. So if you don't know what a zine is, they're usually quite small. They're just folded up pieces of paper, which then form a fold out tiny little magazine that you can have different pieces on them, and they're used a lot in with different activists and change makers because they're quite cheap to make. Lots of people can contribute to them, and then they can be distributed quite cheaply and easily to distribute different ideas and art and things. So yeah, you can make a zine with them. You could just do a presentation of their different ideas that allow them to read their stories, read their poems, whatever, sing their songs. And then, of course, there is a reflection template at the very, very end. So that's it. Looks on paper, it's 5 weeks. Again, as usual, it will depend on how much time you give it, how much time you give to each activities. This activity at the end may take you 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The greenwashing activity may take, depending on how much you do with it, may take a whole day. So it's just totally up to you what you focus on, how many weeks you take doing it. And just, I guess, the most important thing is that you're encouraging your students to work well together, to reflect on how they're working as groups, to value their own creativity, to see how they, even if they don't consider themselves good public speakers or, good at protesting or whatever, that they can see how they can contribute to telling different stories about the world, engaging in different ways, thinking about the Great Turning and how they, can tell stories about the world that support people to think that there is a better world possible, and that they have fun doing it. Should be quite a fun unit. So that's it. And any questions, we will see you at the in-person session.